The views and opinions expressed on this podcast do not necessarily reflect any views and opinions of any grand body that myself or Brandon Williams is a member of. All right, welcome everybody to the Lost Ones Masonic Podcast. I am your host, Brother Joshua Feliciano, and I hail from St. James Lodge number 114, based out of the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the state of New York. Alongside with me, I have my co-host here with me today, Brother Brandon Williams, who hails from George Washington Carver Lodge number 95, hailing out of the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of New York. Today, welcome to episode number 7, and we're talking about John G. Jones. Now, I was originally holding...
Make some noise, drink champs. Don't sue me, Nori. Don't sue me.
So here's the thing. I was literally holding out on this episode just because waiting for, more subscribers and things like that. But truthfully, the subscribers that we do have all kept asking for it. They all wanted to be a part of, literally chime in on the situation. And I sat there and I said, you know what? Better now than never. Let's just get it out of the way. When we talk about John G. Jones is one of the most influential Masons or ex-Masons there ever was. We know him as somebody who is the father of bogus masonry, but a lot of people don't know he brought over a lot of degrees into Prince Hall while he was a Prince Hall Mason. We're going to get into his career. I'm not talking about his beginnings because I did that on one of my lectures. I'm not doing that. We're going over the downfall of what was John G. Jones. The whole point of this is to get people to understand that expelled Masons are no longer Masons and don't have a right to start their own Grand Lodge. So if you're ready, let's get to it. Beginning with John G. Jones, we got to talk about what is the meaning of expulsion. And the first thing I'm going to say is this: when you look at Mackey's jurisprudence, which I have here, I want everybody to understand that this book has been the governing guide for a lot of bogus Masonic organizations. They use this book for their trials. They use this book for their laws, and it is a governing guide. A lot of them don't even write their own. They just use that book. When we look at the explanation of what that means, it says here, a suspended or expelled Mason, or one who, though neither is yet of bad character or immoral conduct, cannot rightfully claim the assistance of a Mason or a lodge of Masons. So once you are expelled, you cannot ask for any relief from any brother, according to the book, right? And mind you, this is something that many jurisdictions follow, and I'm going to keep it real. A lot of people don't. It's okay. I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat any of that. Another thing it says in the book, it says that the Grand Lodge of New York, which is our counterpart here in New York, has very properly deemed expulsion as implying a termination not only of Masonic intercourse or connection with the body inflicting it, but from the Masonic fraternity. So in other words, when you're expelled, you're gone. You're not here. You have nothing to do with us. You do your own. You're out. And this is from regular Masonry. Continuing on with what the book says, it says the expelled person is, in truth, deprived of all exercise of his Masonic functions and is incapable of any communion with his brethren. Once again, we don't have Masonic intercourse with expelled Masons. You need to understand that. But if I know him to be an expelled Mason, I am not bound to heed his call. From an expelled Mason is legally dead, is a legally dead Mason or no Mason at all. Once again, you get expelled, you're not a Mason anymore. That's it. To be a Mason, you have to be part of a jurisdiction. It's that simple. Let me rephrase that. A regular jurisdiction. It must be borne in mind that expulsion completely severs the connection of expelled individual and the fraternity. And it also states here that expulsion annuls all Masonic status and obliterates Masonic existence, and the Mason, whoever it may be, that has been legally expelled from one lodge can never receive admission into another. Now, mind you, this is all in Mackey's jurisprudence, which is the governing guide of many of these organizations. Not saying it's the governing guide of all of them, but of the governing guide. You can't sit here and say, we're going to use this book and then not use the book. Like it's unless you have it written in your own book where you take bits and pieces from here and add it, that's something different. You can't sit there. That's just ironic to even say. When we look at our jurisdiction, right? Our jurisdiction clearly states that expulsion is suspension from all rights and privileges of Masonry, which shall be for a definite or indefinite time. But the question becomes, what is the rights and privileges of Masonry? Right? And then it goes on to say in another article, it says a suspension or expelled Mason shall not be entitled to Masonic relief, nor his widow or orphan children shall not be permitted to visit lodges, walk in Masonic procession, participate in public, nor private Masonic ceremonies, nor to receive a Masonic burial. These are the Masonic rights. Okay. I do not consider an expelled Mason a brother. Let me make that very clear. You are gone. You're done. There's nothing else to talk about. Right. Now that we got the whole expulsion thing out of the way, let's talk about John G. Jones. And I'm going to do a quick timeline, and then we're going to get into details on certain points of these timelines. In 1889, in Cleveland, Ohio, John G. Jones revived and reorganized the General Grand Masonic Congress. In 1889, the man was still a Prince Hall Mason. When we look at 1893, we have the establishment of the Prince Hall Shriners, right? With John G. Jones as at the head of all that. In 1895, we have John G. Jones being suspended from the United Supreme Council. And then in 1896, we have the formation of the Grand Lodge AF and AM of DC. Now, this is very, very important because it wasn't John G. Jones that had nothing to do with this formation. It was H.C. Scott, Henry C. Scott, who was at the helm of this formation. And he is an expelled Mason from the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of DC. He formed his Grand Lodge. But it's important that I mention it because John G. Jones and H.C. Scott were attached by the hip. And he had a big situation that had to do with a court case that John G. Jones was involved with, which we're going to touch on very quickly also. In 1896, there was an article in the Washington Bee that the White Shriners recognized the legitimacy of the Shriners of the ancient Arabic order of the nobles of the Mystic Shrine, right? I'm going to get into details about this because here's the thing. Somebody recently went out their way to give half-ass information and didn't give the entire truth. And there's a reason why I'm saying that, because this individual is now pledging that he's going to start telling the truth or finding the truth, but yet he doesn't know how to spit the truth. So I'm going to sit here and I'm going to correct and acknowledge and talk about the truth with this situation. In the 1900s, the ancient Egyptian Arabic order of the nobles of the Mystic Shrine was formed. And when we look at 1903, the most worshipful St. John's Grand Lodge AF and AM of Illinois was formed. For those that don't know, this was the Grand Lodge that John G. Jones had joined and became the Grand Secretary of literally after its formation, while William Gray became its Grand Master. In 1903, he was also suspended from Prince Hall. And then in 1904, he was expelled from the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Illinois. We're going to touch on all that. In 1904, also, we saw something happen with the Shriners where there was a mass exodus. So let me touch on this real quick. We saw that in 1893, the Prince Hall Shriners was formed, but then in the 1900, there was another branch off that was created, which was the ancient Egyptian Arabic order, the nobles of the Mystic Shrine. I'm not a Shriner. I'll be the first one to tell you that. I'm not going to sit here and get into details on anything that had to do with that. I'm just talking history.
Repeat what you said, Josh, real quick.
I'm not a Shriner.
No. Pride. I want to make sure you're not confusing the two imperial councils.
Right. We're gonna get to that in a second. So we have at this point in 1900, we have the formation of the ancient Egyptian Arabic order of the nobles of the Mystic Shrine, and what happens is between 1900 and 1903 or 1904, we have two shrines. Prince Hall has two shrines. Because what happens is not everybody moved over to the ancient Egyptian. A lot of them still with the ancient Arabic order nobles of the Mystic Shrine, which is the John G. Jones faction. And so what happened was once Jones was expelled, everybody who was not associated with Jones left and joined the ancient Egyptian Arabic order of the Mystic Shrine. And the only people that were left over were the ones that were substantially expelled. And that's very important to understand because at this point you have a shell of a company. Well, at this point, all it is a shell company. It's nothing else, right? So in 1904, you saw everybody else, and that truly when we went from two Prince Hall Shriners to one. In 1906, we have the formation of the King Solomon Grand Lodge of New York. In 1908, we have the formation of the Hyman Grand Lodge of New York, and I'm mentioning those because those are they were formed by John G. Jones and another person. In 1910, we saw the court case against the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of DC, with the Grand Lodge AF&M of DC that we spoke about. I think it was 2 episodes ago. Yeah, 2 episodes ago at the Order Courts. And then in 1914, we saw that Jones passed away in 1914. So what started happening was in 1885, we have the United Supreme Council situation where Jones was Lieutenant Grand Commander. And at this point, he had asked to be excused from the evening. This is during the voting. It was around 10 o'clock, and this is all according to minutes. I'm going to show you guys this in a second. And the commander in chief gave him permission to leave, right? To retire for the night. Word has it that he was doing stuff all day and he was tired. And when we look at it, the election of the Grand Office being in order, brethren were duly elected and installed to the Grand Offices for the ensuing 3 years. And this is directly from the minutes. And what you start to see is things changed. Thornton Jackson was now the most puissant sovereign grand commander of Washington D.C. And what you saw was Jones get demoted to Grand Chancellor. And this is very, very important to understand because the next day, Jones sets up his own United Supreme Council, creates his own minutes, and then literally sends those minutes out as if they're legitimate minutes and stuff like that. And the way this was debunked was that you had one individual that was listed twice in there, and it was the Grand Secretary, or the one, the ones that writes the minutes. And he had went on record and stated that he was a part of the Thornton Jackson, not the Jones faction. And that's how that whole situation was debunked, because for some time there was confusion in the craft because of this. And some did go with Jones and some did go with Thornton Jackson. And so, because back then there's no internet, so everything is through circulation. And Jones knew this. Jones was not stupid. He was a smart man. He knew how to get ahead. He had trademarked the United Supreme Council name. And it became an issue because the Thornton Jackson's United Supreme Council had to change his name. So real quick, in 1896, there was this article right? Where the White Shriners, which is now known as the Shriners International, had chose to recognize the charter from the ancient Arabic order nobles of the Mystic Shrine. This person, who will remain nameless because he's not getting that burn on my show, went out and said that, they recognized that faction. What he slightly missed over was that he did not mention that they were Prince Hall Shriners. So they weren't just recognizing, the ancient Arabic order of nobles of the Mystic Shrine. They were acknowledging and recognizing regular Masons. And this is important because in 1904, when everybody moved over, it was not the same. It was not the same members. So trying to see if I can catch up here. So for that time, there was those two Prince Hall Shriners, and he failed to mention that. That's extremely important. And when we talk about the ancient Arabic order of the nobles of Mystic Shrine, you have to understand that when it comes to Shriners, you need to be a Master Mason in good standing to join. That's the first thing, right? And
want me to touch on that?
Yeah, if you can, please.
Yeah, because I'm a member. I'm a member of Al-Masir 251 by way of Al-Hijaz number 99. And the requirements for membership have changed over the years. Now, at the time that I joined in 2014, you only had to had been a Prince Hall Master Mason, good standing or otherwise. The prerequisite was just that you were indeed a Master Mason. You did not necessarily have to be financially current. And again, that's changed over the years. Prior to that, obviously, you had to be current. There were some things that transpired where leadership dictated it not a necessity. And prior to that, early 2000s, around a lot of our old timers, our predecessors here in New York, they'll tell you that at the time you had to be a member of either the Scottish Rite, one of the two recognized Prince Hall Supreme Councils, Northern Jurisdiction, which is headquartered out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and the Southern Jurisdiction, headquartered out of Memphis, Tennessee, or be a Sir Knight in New York, right, having received your capitular and chivalric degrees in the Holy Royal Arch, as well as the Knights Templar. So I say all that to say that requirements have changed over the years. So I don't want you to think that we're leaving things out or poking things out in the story or leave you with inconsistencies. The requirements have changed over the years.
Right. Cool. So during this time, you had to be a Master Mason, right?
Correct. Yes, sir.
But here's the problem. And I'm not one to sit here and talk about formation. I'm not familiar with the Shriners Law to understand what is considered clandestine, what is considered regular. I can't talk about that because I'm gonna be honest, I don't know. So I don't even know if there even is such a thing. So I'm not going to just touch on that. But one thing I will say that is a fact is that
yes. I mean, just short answer, yes. But
okay,
continue.
So the ancient Egyptian Arabic order nobles of the Mystic Shrine consist of regular Master Masons. Correct. The ancient Arabic order nobles of Mystic Shrines comprises of nothing but bogus Masons. That is the difference. Okay, when we look at the body and the membership of who comprises these two organizations and who's filling these two organizations, that's what you have. There is no regular Mason that is a member of the ancient Arabic order nobles of the Mystic Shrine. And I'm not talking about the state Grand Lodges because they changed their name.
Days old. They
changed their name to Shriners International. I'm talking about specifically the ones that have lineage or claim to have lineage to John G. Jones. Okay. And this is very, very important.
Early 1900s.
Because no matter how you want to flip it, this is the facts. The Prince Hall Shriners, which is the ancient Egyptian Arabic order nobles of the Mystic Shrine, does comprise of regular Masons, legitimate Masons. And the ancient Arabic order nobles of the Mystic Shrine comprises of nothing but bogus Masons. No matter how you want to flip it, that is a fact. So I needed to get that out the way. There was also another article, I forgot what year it was, but that this guy touched on when he talked about being recognized by the Supreme Council of Louisiana. I need to touch on that real quick because I think it was in 1890 something. I think that they decided to recognize Jones's United Supreme Council. But what he did not mention, and which is very, very important, was that around 1905, they pulled that recognition. And that recognition was pulled for a reason. And it was never reestablished. So right now, they cannot visit each other because it was pulled for a reason. When we look, he also said that the Grand Lodge of New York had recognized St. John's Grand Lodge at one point, which is Jones's organization. I forgot the year. But,
also 23rd.
Right. So just to put this out there, while they may have, he didn't touch on the fact that they pulled recognition also because they were bogus Masons, because they were not regular Masons. He did not talk about that. And this is where we have an issue, because he would only give information, but not give the entire story. People feed him this information, and all he does is sit there and literally read whatever they're giving him. He is not a researcher. He is not a historian. All he is a parrot that's feeding whatever, that's reading whatever's being fed to him. Okay, understand that, because you will ask him questions. Guarantee you from what he's reading, and he won't know anything about before or after, just what's in front of him. Moving on. In 1903, we have a suspension from the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. They brought him to trial, and they found him guilty. And I need to read something from here, because it says from this news, from this article, because from this notice that he was suspended, because it's extremely important for people to understand. Illinois has no jurisdiction over Massachusetts. Jones was in Massachusetts creating these bogus Masons. And that's an issue, because you can't be tried in Massachusetts if you belong in Illinois. So what happened was the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts brought him up to charges, even though he's not a member of the jurisdiction. Right? But here's the caveat, and here's the tricky part. In the proceeding, it clearly states that after a fair and impartial trial before the most worshipful Grand Lodge of Illinois, he was found guilty and charged and given an indefinite suspension. And the key phrase that I need people to understand: before the most worshipful Grand Lodge of Illinois, meaning they had permission from the Grand Lodge to do this. So in other words, someone loaded the gun, and the following year, the Grand Lodge pulled that trigger. And I'm going to get to that in a second, but I also want to read another part of this article. It says John G. Jones was tried on preferred charges against him by the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts for participating with assisting irregular and clandestine Masons. So that was the reason why Massachusetts brought charges on him. A lot of these bogus Masons don't understand this. They just, in their eyes, the way they look at it is, well, how can he be tried if he's not a member of this jurisdiction? Understand that clearly it states here, before the most worshipful Grand Lodge of Illinois. So that clearly shows that they had permission from his Grand Lodge to do so.
No, can I add to that?
Absolutely, please.
Not only that, I think what a lot of people fail to realize is, and you'll find this in just about damn near every jurisdiction's constitution, all Master Masons are subject to the laws of the jurisdiction in which they reside.
And so, in any other jurisdiction.
Correct. Mm-hmm. So, like, if you're from Pennsylvania, you move to Arizona, you're still subjected to their Masonic law. Should there be any friction? Normally, there's not. But I say all that to say, even if that wasn't the case, they didn't need Massachusetts' permission. You mean they need Illinois' permission? Well, Illinois, excuse me. Mm-hmm. Like Illinois, Illinois didn't have to sign off on that, because that's where you start. And I'm not going down the rabbit hole of invasion of territory, but well, and to further add to that, there's a lot of constitutions that actually have that in there. That it's actually that if you leave the jurisdiction and you start acting unmasonically somewhere else, that you are subject to that jurisdiction's correct. Their constitutional laws. Right. And I wouldn't be surprised if Illinois had that clause in their constitution, because we've known other jurisdictions to have that clause. Very important. Thank you for that point. Completely forgot about that. Of course.
in 1904, that's when we saw the trigger get pulled. And we saw the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Illinois expel John G. Jones from the order. I'm going to read some things from the minutes. It says, being of an indefinite suspension placed on him by the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge, assisted by one William Gray, did proceed to confer upon the said profanes the first, second, and third degrees of masonry unlawfully and without authority. It says here, the committee met on Saturday, November 28th, 1904, and proceeded with the trial. Jones and Gray was found guilty as charged by committee and recommended by the most worshipful Grand Master that they both be expelled. The recommendations of the committee was approved. Now, I want to bring something very, very clear. William Gray was an unknown Mason. He was not a legitimate Mason. He was bogus in every right. We don't know who gave him his degrees. We don't know what Grand Lodge he originally came from. And when you break it down, there's no way of knowing who this guy is. And there's no proof that he was a legitimate Mason whatsoever. If there is, I would love for somebody to show me that. But when it's all said and done, it's in the minutes that they were expelled at this point. What started happening is, and this is very important, you started to see that once they were suspended, once Jones was suspended, he got together with Gray and he formed St. John's Grand Lodge in Illinois. He saw the writing on the wall. He knew he was on his way out. He decided to sit there and create his own Grand Lodge at that point. He with the assistance of William Gray. For those that don't know, William Gray was later on expelled from St. John's Grand Lodge and then replaced by John G. Jones as the new Grand Master. So he was just a placeholder. That's all he was. And he was used just like anybody else Jones has used in the past. Very important topic and when it comes to Jones's career, because not many people, there's word that, oh, we don't have this documented, we don't know where it came from. No, we have it documented and everything is documented. Let's move on. And this is very, very important. So we start seeing when the whole United Supreme Council thing happened, right, where there was that split, and we're going to backtrack a little bit because I got to talk about history with Dorsey Seville. Dorsey Seville was his right-hand man, right? And what you started to see was the United Supreme Council was formed and everything started falling apart. At this point, and I'm talking between Jones and Seville, Seville was a 32nd degree Mason. The only 33rd degree Mason that was there was Jones in this whole entire situation when it was reformed. So Dorsey Seville, very important. He was a member of the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of DC. And in 1897, he was expelled for the same Masonic crimes as John G. Jones. He helped form Jones's United Supreme Council, and then they had a fallout. And what happens is Seville is expelled from Jones's Shriners, and he's also expelled from the United Supreme Council, and I guess whatever Grand Lodge he was a part of that was helping Jones. And Seville then joins PHO with William D. Matthews, and he forms Eureka Grand Lodge in DC, and is the first Grand Master of that Grand Lodge. He was also the sovereign Grand Commander of the National Supreme Council between 1897 and 1911. Now, this is very, very important because the National Supreme Council was a brand new toy created by Seville and Matthews. They brought over membership from all over. I'm not going to get into details of the National Supreme Council, but they brought them in not as illegally. And we can talk about that a whole nother time. In 1910, there was a lawsuit between Jones and the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of DC, where Jones said under oath that the rumor of Romania granting a charter to the John G to the Grand Masonic Congress, or matter of fact, not the Grand Masonic Congress, to the Grand Lodge AFNAM of DC, that was a lie created by Seville. And I have an affidavit here written by Jones from this court case where he states that a affiant further states upon oath that Dorsey F. Seville was expelled for unmasonic conduct from the United Supreme Council of Scottish Rite Masons and the Imperial Grand Council of Mystic Shrine. Now we're talking about Jones's organization, not we're not talking about the Prince Hall. And then it states here, Afeni further states that the Afeni's opinion that the said Dorsey Seville is the most unmitigated falsifier, perjurer, and liar that ever disgraced the United States. and here's the best part. That article that was from 1896 that came from the Washington Bee. Guess who was running the Washington Bee? Dorsey Seville. So the credibility of any article that comes from the Washington Bee, in my opinion, is not up there, because you have somebody who's a born like straight up liar running it. And anything that has to do with Jones, I guarantee you, could either not be true or is greatly exaggerated. So understand that we have an issue there also. And and mind you, these documents that I have, I'm gonna post them on the screen so everybody can see. So then let's continue talking about the 1910 lawsuit, right? Where, you know, we spoke about it with the whole sweeping victory document, and it was very quick. We didn't really touch on it too deeply, but there are some things written in the actual court case that I want to highlight. The principle upon which courts of equity proceed in restraining the situation of names. I want to emphasize situation of names is not the property acquired by one party, is the name, but to prevent the fraud, deception in dealing with the party charged with the simulation of the name by another in a similar business. So to all you that think that this court case was about legitimacy, this one sentence tells you what this court case was about. I don't want to sit here and go back and forth that the court case made you legitimate, because it did not. It was about the name. Further going into this, it says both organizations have a number of members. Only difference in there is their name is the word ancient, which is found on the title of incorporation. Courts of equity do not exercise jurisdiction to inquire into the right of different association to hold themselves regular. So in other words, this is the jurisdiction of DC saying that they cannot say who's regular and who's not regular. The jurisdiction of DC saying this. And this is important because I'm gonna get to this later on, because every state can say their own thing. I want to touch on John G. Jones being arrested also. So I have this document, right? It was I got to give credit to James Morgan for this one. So some years ago, the same guy that likes to talk about quote unquote truth but doesn't tell the truth sat there and said that Jones was never ever arrested for anything, right? That there's no proof of that people just running their mouth saying that, you know, that, but there's never any proof. And he sat there and threw a challenge out to the Prince Hall think tank and said, I would give you guys $100 if you guys can give me that proof. So James stepped up and showed him the proof. And I just want to put it out there and just read certain points from this article. It says the charge of criminal libel, the charge, meaning to be charged, you have to be arrested, against J.G. Jones being an envoy of the AFN-AM. And then it says Mr. Jones is attacking the parent order in speech and writing. So not to, you know, dig in a little bit more, but after this was posted, that video was taken down. And then people wonder why I don't go on that show. And one of the biggest things, and also, and we're wrapping up soon right now, one of the biggest things I also want to talk about is you also have these fake John G. Jones organizations out there. Like, you have fake Prince Hall organizations, and then you have fake John G. Jones ones as well. I'm gonna for example, it was the John G. Jones Grand Lodge, whatever they want to call themselves, right? They have no lineage whatsoever to John G. Jones. All they did was call themselves John G. Jones, and they claiming they have some type of lineage to them. That Grand Lodge was formed by was formed by members of Hiram of Tyree Grand Lodge in California. And there's a famous court case, and I'm gonna share the screen for this one. This is important. There's a famous court case, right? And this is the most worshipful the most worshipful Hiram of Tyree Grand Lodge of ancient, free, and accepted Masons, colored of the state of New York, versus the most worshipful Sons of Light Grand Lodge, ancient, free, and accepted Masons of the jurisdiction of California. And this was in 1949. And I want to sit here and go through this real quickly because I just want to make this very fast. In this court case, the courts actually determined that both organizations were clandestine. And it clearly states it is conceded, and the court found that both plaintiff and defendant are clandestine Masonic lodges. I'm going to just let that breathe for a second. And I want people to understand that members of that group
go back to it, because I think you miss a huge component in that paragraph. It says it continues to say, and I quote, "It is difficult to understand how a court can grant an exclusive right to operate a clandestine lodge on the ground that the lodge, which is first formed, has the sole right to exist. Further, however, while the court cannot grant an exclusive right to the first formed lodge, it can prevent a second lodge from misrepresenting so as to give the impression that it is the other lodge or has an exclusive right."
So what that is saying is very important, because what that is saying is neither one of these two Grand Lodges were formed first. When you look at who was formed first, the Grand Lodge of California was formed first. Not neither one of these two. So both of these two are considered clandestine. And I just want to make this very clear. Hiram of Tyree Grand Lodge was formed by Robert J. Fletcher, which is a past Grand Master of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of California. The year after he was expelled, he created this Grand Lodge. And this is who they're tied to. This is who that John G. Jones Grand Lodge is tied to, because of the fact that their members came from that Grand Lodge. So think.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is an invasion.
It's not even an invasion of territory. No. Check this out. I'm gonna link this up. I'm gonna link it together real nicely for everybody to understand, because it really gets down to the point. And mind you, this is California. In the last one, DC said they cannot grant it, but California clearly is sitting here saying, nah, these two are clearly clandestine, right? When you look at it, if the state is sitting here saying, guess what, they are clandestine, and you have members that leave and form a new Grand Lodge called John G. Jones Grand Lodge, guess what? That doesn't change anything. They're still clandestine. They're still bogus. It doesn't change anything. Your lineage is tied to them, and then mind you, you have no lineage whatsoever to regular Masonry, and you have nothing tying you to John G. Jones, and you're calling yourself John G. Jones. So, and mind you, this is throughout the country. This is just an example of California.
Throughout the world, quite frankly.
So, I just needed to bring that across. So that's where we are. Jones was very influential, but at the end of the day, he let his own pride and ego get the best of him to a point where he couldn't. Once it was over, it's it. There was no stopping. So, yeah, I had to make this. I needed to make this because a lot of people were asking for it, and I also need people to understand that once you're an expelled Mason, that's it. You're done. You're done. There's no reason for you. You can sit there and join another organization or whatever, but you're not regular. None. You're not regular. You're not going to sit there and it's not no way of running around that. You cannot be an expelled Mason and start a Grand Lodge and call yourself regular. And you cannot sit there and be a non-Mason and create a Grand Lodge and then say that you're regular. It's not how it works. So Bren, any thoughts?
I mean, you know, I don't want to open too many cans of worms. I will say this, you know, John G. Jones, regardless of his action, I'm speaking with my fez on, you know, metaphorically. You know, he is credited as our first imperial potentate. Obviously, can't take anything away from him that he's done in a regular sense, and I certainly won't try to. The man was an attorney, an aspiring attorney. The man was he's very knowledgeable, very intelligent, and you know, it's kind of a pattern when you look at these cases of clandestine Masons and the formation of such bodies. When you look at the people that are doing it, like, these are not stupid people. These are not nobodies. These are highly influential, you know, political figures that have influence. They have power. They understand Masonry. They understand the weeds and the wording, and that's why they've been able to wiggle around and have some level of success. So, again, not necessarily condoning it, but you have to give credit to the tenacity and psyche that kind of goes into being able to project such a thought. But nevertheless, like you said, Josh, you know, John G. he's just one of those guys. You can't talk Prince Hall Masonic history without bringing his name up. It's just you're playing yourself. You know, everyone's going to feel the way they feel, and you know, that's just my 2 cents on it. The man, you know, he did what he did, but you know, hey.
One thing I want to quickly touch on, right?
Of course.
He died in 1914, right? And
yes,
there's this whole big thing about that, you know, Romania gave them their first charter, and I don't understand why they believe it, but if you go into the history books and you go into literally the pages and documents and stuff like that, the first Romanian diplomat did not hit United States until after Jones died.
I was going to say, wasn't it like around maybe even after the First World War?
It was, I don't even remember. I know for a fact it was after Jones died. So
yeah, because Jones died in 14, First World War was in 17.
So I think it was around 1918 probably then, or 1916, around there. So literally it was years after Jones had died. So how did Jones obtain this Romanian charter if the first diplomat?
He's a space alien.
Time travel, bro. I'm telling you, they can time travel.
Hey, I wasn't there. I don't know.
And another thing I want to touch on is for those who think that the court case from the DC made that organization legitimate, I need you to understand that if your state charter is not a Masonic charter, and everybody knows that it only gives you the right to operate as a business, then the courts are going to treat it exactly the same way. Masonic law is Masonic law. They will never sit here and touch on Masonic law, right? And it's crazy. I was even surprised to even see that California did. But the reality of it is, you cannot sit here and expect to be called legitimate when the court case was only talking about the name of the organization. Like, it's not about the Masonic legitimacy.
Yes, that was the only thing in question.
And you have to read the documents, and you have those that will sit there and fight me tooth and nail, bro. I mean, they will sit there and be like, yo, that's not true. If you think that, they are so stuck in their beliefs. And it's okay, cool. Y'all want to, that's fine. But understand, anybody who has common sense can see that. And
well, you know, common sense
it's crazy. And this is why, you know, I've taken a step back in going back and forth in debating against certain individuals, because there's no change in their mind. It just, they're going to think what they want to think and say what they want to say, present the same information all the time, and still be wrong and strong and not care. So why am I sitting here going back and forth trying to change your mind when I can educate the public and have them understand where I'm coming from? You know, and that's what I'm doing going forward. For those of you who watch the show, who are part of these organizations, I thank you for for reaching out to me and giving me reason to move forward, because I've gotten a few messages here and there from people who are leaving these organizations and joining regular jurisdictions because of the fact that they don't want to deal with the nonsense of what these groups offer. And it's very, very important for people to understand that, yes, these dudes are bogus. You're going to deal with nonsense from them. So understand that at the end of the day, I appreciate those that do watch. But if you're learning something, great. But I also want to teach the those that don't know, those that literally come from, are not a part of these organizations, that don't know a difference. That's the important part. They need to know. The public needs to know that these bogus organizations exist, and this is why I'm doing it. And that's it. Brandon, you have any closing thoughts?
No, not really. Just again, this was a fun one. It was definitely, and I'm one of those people that's been trying to get it done. So it was good to finally put it out there. I've got nothing.
Yeah, I mean, the proof is in the pudding. Leave your comments, subscribe, leave a like. Listen, I have no problem. I reply to anybody who decides to comment. So trust me, understand that if you're not going to sit here and wait and try to debate me on regularity, and you're not coming into this with an open mind, understand I'm not entertaining you anymore, and I'm not doing it. It's just a waste of space and a waste of conversation. So don't even bother leaving a comment, because I won't address you. You're going to say what you're going to say, and I'm going to respond and leave it at that. There's nothing else to talk about. I see you on the next episode. Peace, y'all.